Okay, let's recap chapter 4. So, micro versus macroeconomics. So, make sure you understand the difference between the two. So, in microeconomics, we look at specific individual markets compared to macro, where we look at the whole market or the whole economy. In microeconomics, we look at the effects on prices of a good, while in macroeconomics, we just look at the general price levels, so the prices of everything involved. Again, individual labor markets compared to employment as a whole, individual consumer behavior compared to just consumer behavior as a whole, supply of goods, productive capacity of the economy. So you get the idea. Specific, less specific. So living standards, we break them up into two sections. We got material living standards and non-material living standards. So material covers the ability of individuals to access goods and services, usually measured through real GDP or even with GDP per capita, where you divide the real GDP of the economy by the population to figure out the true value each consumer or each contributor to the economy obtains. So non-material living standards. This measures a wide range of other factors that impacts a person's well-being and quality of life. We got things like environmental quality, physical and mental health, life expectancy, and crime rates, to name a few measures of non-material. So guys, in the future, when you're covering questions and they ask you to talk about living standards, you need to talk about the material side of things and the non-material side of things, alright? Make sure you remember to include it, because I've seen a lot of people complete questions and forget to mention why it impacts living standards specifically. This circular flow model was something I implemented towards, I think, the last week of term before we broke off. So here you got the households, sector, and businesses or firms. Flow 1 is literally households going to firms, providing them their resources, land, labor, and capital. Flow 2 is the income received or in compensation for them providing their resources to businesses. The third flow is the consumption section. So when we get all this money, what do we do with it? Well, we consume products, we also save money, we also get taxed, and we also buy imports. Now this section here is the leakages, savings, taxation, and imports, because it reduces the level of economic activity in the economy negatively. While on the opposite side, investments, government spending, and exports improve the economy, and they're a form of injection. And the last bit, flow 4, is firms producing goods and services to households. So this is how we measure our real GDP. Alright, so this circular flow model is aggregate demand. Flow 3, essentially you could just replace this with GDP, or AD equals C plus I plus G plus net exports. Alright, so if you need to refer back to this and read the details, it's on page 120 to 122. So the business cycle, this was covered in the last PowerPoint. Complete cycle goes from peak to trough and then back again till its peak. No two business cycles are the same. The last time we experienced a trough or a recession was in 1991. Australia holds a record of 29 consistent years of growth. This might change depending on the impact of COVID-19. So refer back to pages 123 to 26 if you want to review that concept. Remember the following terms: peak, troughs, booms, contraction, and expansion. Very important. Last year's exam, they were talking a lot about business cycles, and it caught a lot of students by surprise. So aggregate demand, this is covered on page 127 to 128, represents the total expenditure of goods and services produced in the economy over a period of time. We can use the circular flow model to explain the impact any economic factor can have on aggregate demand. So AD, there's the formula again. So whenever you talk about aggregate demand, you have to tell me, for example, one factor of demand. How does it impact this formula? Does it impact consumption? Does it impact investment? Does it impact government consumption or government spend? No, infrastructure. Or does it impact exports or imports? How does it impact aggregate demand as a whole? So here are your factors. Changes in the general level of prices is more of a movement, not a shift. We've got disposable income, interest rates, consumer confidence, business confidence, the exchange rate, and rates of economic growth overseas, causing shifts. This should be all familiar to you. This is stuff we've covered before. It's very similar to microeconomics, where we looked at individual demand factors. So aggregate supply, I'm not going to read all of this, I'm just going to read the start of it. Represents the total volume of goods and services that producers are prepared to supply to the market. It represents the ability of an economy to make available the goods and services to meet aggregate demand. So if you need some more info, go to page 133 and 134 to read up on it. But essentially, it's just the supply of the economy, or in a country. So factors of supply. We got stuff like quality of factors of production, quantity of factors of production, costs of production, technological change, productivity growth, exchange rates, and climatic conditions. So our new AD line is not really a line anymore, it's more of a curve. This is because the downward sloping AD curve takes into account increasing purchasing power, the wealth effect, lower interest rates, and increased international competitiveness. So you can see here that it becomes inelastic, starts to become elastic, then starts becoming more elastic. Same thing with our AS line or curve. It's in the short run, you can draw a straight line, that's perfectly fine, because wages are sticky and it takes time to adjust. So, you know, so the cost of production is pretty fixed in the short term. While in the long term, aggregate supply will probably look like this, a curve, where we got the three different sections, and you can see it's very elastic and then becomes more inelastic as we hit productive capacity. If you have any questions about chapter 4, hit me up. Other than that, you should be completing all the review questions and be up to date and ready to move on to chapter 5. See you around.